Hi, I'm Benjamin Mack-Jackson, founder of the World War II Veterans History Project. I started this project in the summer of 2015 with the goal of providing knowledge and inspiration to my generation so they can better appreciate and understand what these heroes went through. My mission is to preserve the memories of the greatest generation. In this story, Private Alvin Hersey, who served in the United States Army, shares his stories of how he was captured and interned for 68 days at Stalag 5, a German prisoner of war camp, before being liberated. His story takes you back to the harsh conditions of one of the largest and most deadly battles of the war, the Battle of the Bulge. Here's his story.
Alvin Hersey. World War II, I was the 3rd Army 26th Division, 328th Infantry. Went down to Camp Blandon in Florida, basic training. I went by boat over to France and then fought up through Germany. I was a company messenger. I delivered messages from the headquarters throughout to the platoons, especially the password. We couldn't give that over the phone and whatnot. I also carried a 40-pound radio on my back, and I could call in the artillery to where we were fighting ahead of the troops. I was captured we was cleaning out houses in the city. We'd go from one house and then right up a street. If we didn't go through the front door, we went bazooka right inside of the house. And then we'd go in there and capture anybody that was in there. And then we'd go along to the next house right up through. And then at night, we'd get to a special house that had a cement ceiling in the cellar, and we stayed down cellar. But the next morning, they brought a tank up and knocked the house down around us, and smoke grenades down there, and we had to come out. That's why we was captured, yeah.
Alvin Hersey was captured by a unit from the infamous 1st SS Division, which is most commonly known to be the elite bodyguard of Adolf Hitler. Hersey was transferred to Stalag 5A, a prisoner of war camp near Ludwigsburg, Germany, and interned there for 68 days before being liberated.
We were treated good. We didn't get much food. We got a bowl of coffee for breakfast, and a bowl of soup for supper, and a 1/7 of a German loaf of bread for all day. Yeah. But fortunately, we would receive American Red Cross boxes, and it was 1 box for 2 men. We was leaving, they said, going to break up the camp, and they had a lot of Red Cross boxes, so they told us to take as many as we could carry. I took 2, but during that night, I had in my knapsack on my back, and I was sleeping with my arms through the strings, And during the night, Russians, they didn't get Red Cross box. They come up, they caught a hole in that bag and took my boxes. If I'd have woke up, probably they would have taken me too. And we were moving back away from the front lines. We'd stay in athletic fields, sheep barns, cow barns, and things like that, and keep moving back. And then we got up to one barn there, and the guards left us during the night, and then the 12th Armored come in with the tanks and freed us right there. Very last, pretty near the last of the war, they sent us back to France to a camp, and we would take a ship back to home. You know. We didn't go back into fighting, no. First night we got in there, they give us a dinner. They give us big steaks to take up the whole plate. They really give us a good meal. I think the military in general is really great. Yeah, they know what they're going to do right away, all the time, yeah. It was an honor to serve in the country, to keep it free.
After the war, Mr. Hersey went on to become a dairy inspector for the state of Maine. Today he lives in the Villages and he is 99 years old. In this story, Lieutenant Junior Grade Walter Bowron shares his experiences while serving on a Liberty ship in the Coast Guard. Hear about meeting a famous British relative in Morocco, as well as the humorous situations aboard his ship as he traveled around the world. His face-to-face encounters with German prisoners of war aboard his ship take you back to what the world was like for the men and women serving our country in World War II. Here's his story.
Walter Glenn Bowron, Lieutenant J.G., United States Coast Guard. My job was standing watch from port for 4 hours twice a day, running the engines, taking orders from the man on the bridge, full ahead or full astern or whatever the order might be. It was put on the ship, the John Sargent, SS John Sargent, which is a Liberty ship. As a member of the Coast Guard, I was an engineering personnel, so I was an engineering officer aboard my first ship. And it was a break-in for me in my initial voyage, and we went to Casablanca, North Africa.
Walter Bowron was stationed in North Africa during the period when the Casablanca Conference took place. From January 14th to January 24th, 1943, United States President Franklin D. Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill met to discuss Allied strategy. In this meeting between the Allied leaders, the decision was made that the axis of Germany, Italy, and Japan would be fought to their ultimate defeat.
Each head of state carried some of their closest aides with them. The English Churchill had a man by the name of Lord Cunningham, who was the first Lord of the British Admiralty at that time. My grandmother in Birmingham was named Ada Cunningham. And before I went into the service, she said, "Glenn, if you ever get to England, you've got a relative there, the family of Cunninghams." So now let's go back to Casablanca. I had just come aboard 6 weeks before when we hit Casablanca. I had a clean uniform. It was pressed and looked pretty good. So the captain told me that I was to report the next morning with the one or two others and be picked up and taken to an assembly area where we would get ready to march in front of the heads of state. Well, it wound up that the heads of state were in their own Jeep, and they rode by instead of us marching by. They figured they could do it quicker that way and get away from us. Make a long story short, when they came by and the British Churchill came by, he slowed down and he stopped in close as he could get to our unit. The Navy man got out and came around and looked for Bowron, Walter Bowron. I held up my hand and said, "Ho," told him I was there. And he came and he shook my hand. He said, "Mr. Bowron," he says, I was so busy saluting him, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether you were going to shoot me or what. But he said, "I want to let you know that we were related. And I want to know how we were related." I said, "Sir, my grandmother, Ada Cunningham, is where it would come from." He said, Ada Cunningham. He lives in Alabama?" I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "It's a pleasure meeting you, sir. Tell her hello for me." That was it. He turned, got back in his Jeep, and they went on. That was a highlight of my entire service, getting to meet a relative who happened to be the first officer of the British Navy. Right off the coast of Bizerte in North Africa, we were hit by German personnel. And we didn't lose the ship, but we had to run the ship ashore, drain the water out, and beef up the broken spots, and we reshipped and brought that ship back to the United States. On another occasion, we were in North Africa. We were delivering personnel from Australia and New Zealand and different places. We were acting like a troop taxi. We were taking troops from one spot and sending them to another spot, and most of that was in Italy. One occasion we had a boat come alongside where we were to pick up a pilot, and the mate up on the ship's top of deck yelled down to the seaman to let down the ladder so that the man could come aboard. Well, he picked it up and threw it, and it wasn't attached anywhere. It just fell on the water. It hit the deck of the pilot boat and fell in the water. That was a funny occasion. We didn't take him aboard. We almost tried to kill him while he came aboard. That was funny. I came off of the duty from lunch one day, and I was standing out on the decks with the German prisoners coming aboard and getting settled in. And there was an American soldier there standing there with his .45 on his hip and a shotgun in his hand. He was guarding those German soldiers. They had a little freedom. They weren't down in the bunks. They were up on the deck getting some fresh air and whatever. And I turned to the sergeant. I said, "Sergeant," I said, "how do these guys get fed?" He said, "Sir," he says, we feed them regular C rations and K rations and whatever we've got. And we rely on the ships to supply coffee and other drinks, water and so forth." I said, "Okay, that's fine." He said, "But we've got some on this ship that ought to be in the hospital." He called one man over. That man was not a German citizen. He was from one of the outlying countries at that time that Germany had taken over and taken the men and pressed them into the service. They needed personnel, and that's the only way they could get them. To make a long story short, he said, this man is so sick, he doesn't need anything. I said, stay right here a minute. I'll go back into the kitchen and tell the chef. I said, chef, let me have a canteen with about this much soup in it. He said, the only soup we've got is vegetable soup. We've got a lot of vegetables in it. I said, that's perfect. He gave me what I wanted. I took it out there, poured it into his container that he had carried on his hip. And that was the first food he had had in some days. Well, I saw that he got food to eat at least once a day, every day he was on that ship, and it took us about 30 days to get home because that was when we met a hurricane leaving the Mediterranean and going back to Norfolk or Baltimore. Baltimore was our destination. The same group of men were divided. All of the officers were put in number 1 tween deck, if you know what I mean. That's the first hole back from the bow. And the tween deck is that down about 9, 10 feet, and you got flooring in there. And below that is the rest of the hull of the ship where you would put cargo normally. But here we had all the officers up in the bow of the ship. And the soldiers, the German soldiers were back in 4 and 5, mostly 4 tween deck, and that's all they needed. Now, how do you get into a tween deck from a deck above, out there where everybody is? You got a little ladder made out of pipe, about this wide, just enough room for a big boot to fit in. And you climb one over the other, one hand at a time. And you got about 8 to 10 feet here to get over. Now, what do these officers down there have in the way of sanitation supplies or whatever? They don't have a damn thing. They've got a big 40-gallon drum like the ones you see outside of a filling station or whatever. Top taken out and a half top put back on. That's where they sat to go to the bathroom. A bunch of officers. Who in the world is going to empty that thing when it gets to where it needs emptying? They call the guard and they say, "Guard, we need some help down there to empty that." He says, "Look around you. You've got all the help you need. You get it up." So the officers now build this thing up, and now they've got to come up this little ladder. Now, how you going to get a 40-gallon drum up there? You know how much a liquid weighs? So they said they needed some line rope. So they did make a rope, and they allowed them to take that rope, and 8 or 10 people pulling from the top and 1 or 2 going from the bottom. They couldn't go just up the stairs, up that ladder. Colonels, majors, all rank. And the poorest lieutenant or captain in there is the ones that caught the trouble because they were the youngest in rank, and they had to do it. They were ordered to do it, and they did it. Now, that's a funny story. What you did, they learned after the first trip, about every hour that damn thing would go up, and because it didn't have but just a small amount of liquid in it, or whatever. Now, that's a funny story. The war's over, and I come back to school. I was in Auburn, Alabama, at API at that time. It's Auburn University today. Finished my education, got my degree in mechanical engineering. Went to work for a corporation that no longer exists, known as Union Carbide. They were the people in the old days for you that made ever-ready batteries, pressed-on antifreeze for the automobiles, and other more technical chemicals and stuff. I was with the Lindy division of Union Carbide, which was the manufacturing of oxygen and other gases. They made the tools that you used to weld with and so forth. And so I went to work for them, and they sent me, of all places, to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, because they had the prime contract with the government to make the atomic bomb in Oak Ridge, or to experiment with it. So I was there for a few months. At that time, they told me I had had my stay there. You would report back to Birmingham, and they put me in the field as a salesperson. I can sit here now at 90, going on 92, and say that, yeah, I learned a lot about it, but I don't know that I did, except for the fact that we got to keep this country as strong as we can possibly do it. I would be most unhappy if we just did away with something that we should have kept. And I want to see our boys strong and healthy and given the latest of armaments and so forth so they can do the job. And God bless them all, every one of them.
Mr. Bowron went on to become a mechanical engineer and work with the world-famous aerospace engineer Wernher von Braun. Today, he lives in Mount Dora with his wife Beverly. He is 91 years old. To learn more about the World War II Veterans History Project, please visit our website at www.veteranshistoryproject.com. We look forward to seeing you again for more exciting stories from the greatest generation.
Production support for the Veterans History Project is made possible by the Parity Financial Group, proudly saluting the extraordinary students who make up our future generation, and the military veterans from the greatest generation.